Good morning, everybody. I'm Tim O'Brien. I'm the senior executive editor of Bloomberg Opinion, the commentary arm of Bloomberg News. And I'm here this morning with two political smarties who know, I think, everything you'd need to know about politics. They'd never say that about themselves, so I can say it for them. I'm with Nia-Malika Henderson, who is a political columnist for Bloomberg Opinion. She's based in Washington, and Patricia Lopez, who's also a political opinion writer for us, and she is based in Minnesota. And we have a lot to unpack this morning because there was a big primary tonight. The Super Tuesday results landed. And while some of it was, of course, expected, there are trend lines underneath it that were unexpected, perhaps, and are continuing to be disturbing. But let's start with some of the news of the day, you guys. Nikki Haley has decided to exit the race. She still has a little bit of money in the bank, and she demonstrated a decent amount of courage late in her campaign in terms of taking on Donald Trump. But Nia, what are we to make of Haley next? Where does she go from here? What does she represent in the party, and what are you looking at?
Well, listen, I think immediately people are wondering if she's going to endorse Donald Trump. She, in this last stretch, very much, I think, sharpened her attacks on Donald Trump, essentially calling him a losing loser who always loses. And she will speak in a few hours, dropping out of this race. I think the real question about her is, I think she did much better than people thought she would do. She only got a handful of delegates. I think it was like that, about 50 or so, won Vermont and Washington, D.C., but she really represented the sort of anti-Trump and slightly never Trump wing of the party, right? So consistently got 30 to 40% in the polls, eating away at Donald Trump's dominance. The question, I think, is she the real sort of leader of this wing of the party, or is she just sort of a vessel, right? Bernie Sanders was the leader of a movement, right? If you think back to the battle between Sanders and Clinton, and he was a voice, folks, and it was a real movement that was. Nikki
Who
Haley,
were
I'm not
passionately
exactly
dedicated
sure,
to
right?
him.
Dedicated to him, exactly. They were attached to his message, attached to his cause, and very much liked him. Here with these voters, a lot of those folks who were Trump to Biden voters, they saw Nikki Haley as a placeholder for their voice and for their vote. So how much sway she has going forward is unclear to me. And I think broadly, the idea of endorsing is just not a real big thing anymore in the way that it was, I think, about a decade ago. Hold the same power in terms of the substance and moving folks. But listen, I think if you are Donald Trump, Nikki Haley has lived rent free in his head for many, many weeks now. She has been defiant, she has been disloyal. And so he certainly wants her out there for him because she at least represents this 30%. And these are college educated Republican suburban women who find Donald Trump distasteful. They hate his character. They hate the kind of rhetoric that he spews routinely. And part of it is their identity is tied to not liking Trump, to being a disapproving kind of member of the Republican Party and not thinking right for the country. So we'll see what kind of sway Nikki Haley has going forward with that crowd, folks.
There's two things to peel off from that, I think, that are interesting. And as you noted, she hasn't indicated where she'll be fully on an endorsement. She has said she won't endorse him immediately. I think that Trump probably feels vindictive towards Nikki Haley as he does towards anyone who doesn't, quote unquote, get with the program. I think he wanted to romp through the primary season with a clean sweep, and she tipped the apple cart on that by winning in Vermont and Washington. And although he's had this incredibly muscular and robust performance, I think he's going to see her as someone who put a scratch across the glass of his little primary dream. But Patricia, as Nia mentioned, Nikki Haley represents about a, say, 30% or so protest vote within the GOP against Trump. And as you noted in a column you wrote for us today about the Minnesota outcome, it's still to be decided where those voters decide to go to find a home. Do they stay at home in the general election,
Mhm.
or do they actually vote for Biden? And tell me what you think about that dynamic.
I think, she was, essentially a protest, a protest vote. Um, where they go, I think a lot of them have said they will vote for Biden. Not all of them. Some of them will just be, they're diehard Republicans, even if they're old school Republicans, and they will probably just stay home. In any case, Trump is going to need that 30%. And as for the endorsement, I think if Nikki Haley endorses Trump at any point, she undoes all of the work that she did in developing herself as a candidate with a strong anti-Trump message. And it will not only hurt her with Trump voters, I think it will hurt her with voters overall, because she will come across as very, shifty and subservient. And, just like all of the other bootlickers that wound up kissing the ring for Trump, if she does that, I think it would be hard to craft much of a political future for herself.
So you're telling me you'd be shocked if Nikki Haley turned out to be a hypocrite?
I would
Like,
not
I'm
be
just,
shocked, because I've covered politics too long for
uh,
that. But I'm just saying it would do
yeah, I
some
mean,
damage.
she did. Yeah, I mean, I think she's been Janus-faced in many ways around Trump. She served in his administration. She was his ambassador to the UN. She
Right.
left the White House praising him, not criticizing
That's
him.
right.
And then it took her a while to get her sea legs during this primary season to actually come out of the gates and criticize him. And even then, she sort of hedged around certain things like the multiple indictments, criminal and civil, he's faced, et cetera, et cetera.
Interestingly, I don't think she really refined her message until she was pretty sure that she was no longer viable. And at that point, it became less about winning the nomination than about carving out an actual place for herself and speaking her mind. And that's when she started to get some real traction.
But, just in terms of courage on her part,
Mhm.
Liz Cheney hit this note early on. She basically torched her own political future, not her political future, but her political presence, her place in the party as it's currently built, to become a full-throated, principled critic of Donald
Right.
Trump. Haley didn't get there as quickly. So I just sort of wonder, yeah, she may withhold her endorsement of
Mhm.
Trump for like a nanosecond, but I do think she'll ultimately see herself as a good Republican who should support the candidate, even though the candidate is an anarchist.
I think that would
And what's going
But
to be
this gets go.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, what's interesting is how she's does it, right? Because being in Trump's camp requires a level of servility and subservience. I mean, this is a man who called her bird brain as her nickname. Listen, it's been done before. Ted Cruz, Exhibit A,
Made
B,
fun of
C,
her
and D.
ethnic and made fun of her
Exactly.
yeah, and he
Exactly.
made fun of
So
her ethnic and racial identity
and her
repeatedly.
husband, right? I think
Yeah.
he called into question her husband as well, who's serving. And so it'll
Oh
be
yeah.
interesting to see how she goes about it, because being in Trump's orbit requires a 100% loyalty. A lot of these folks have been willing to do it, as we said before, but it's going to, I think for people who were Nikki Haley believers, and that might be 5 or 10% of her voters, it, I think, will sort of undermine some of her credibility. But again, no surprise that she has dabbled in hypocrisy.
Yeah, I think it'll be
Nia,
disastrous.
I want to ask you, I wanted to ask you something off of that, Nia, which is Haley also represents something that's beyond her, which is the future of traditional conservatism
Mhm.
within the Republican Party. And there's been, I think, kind of a wave of recent epitaphs written for that, saying that basically Trump's stranglehold on the party during the primary season means that traditional conservatism is dead. And I think that's a premature take. It could be proven true over time. It's certainly under threat, but I think I think it gets into an interesting conversation about two things. One is are we in danger of extrapolating national trends out of local primary results that may look very different in the general election, as they always do? And then secondly, I do think if Trump wins in November, that is going to represent an existential crisis for traditional conservatism. If he loses, I think there's going to be this brawl within the party for deciding where they go from here. And in that case, I don't think Reaganism or traditional conservatism is dead. And so that's yet to be seen. But I was wondering what your thoughts are on all of that.
I think that's right. Listen, Reaganism is sort of on at this point with Donald Trump scrambling the brand of the Republican Party on any number of issues, foreign policy, the economy, Social Security, all sorts of issues. And so we'll have to see. If he wins in November, he's going to be the most important figure in the last 100 years. If he loses, I think, what does that mean for somebody like DeSantis? What does that mean for sort of the Trump pretenders? Can there really be a Trump pretender? Right. I mean, sort of one theory of the case with Trump is that the current Republican Party is sort of like a cult, right? And Donald Trump is essentially the cult leader, right? And once the cult leader, if you study sort of anthropology and sociology, once the cult leader is no more, they're sort of sidelined or die or whatever, the cult kind of collapses, right? So
the air goes out of the balloon.
That actually could happen. Yeah, the air goes out of the balloon. You don't who can sort of fill the shoes of the leader. You saw Ron DeSantis try to do that. You've seen somebody like Vivek Ramaswamy try to do that as well. And so I think it is going to be a real question. But I think right now the party is probably 60, 70% Trumpism, sort of the MAGA, maybe 30 or 40% Reagan. It's the smaller part of the party. But I do think one argument, and you've seen Nikki Haley actually make this, is that MAGA hasn't really been winning across the country over these last cycles. And so is that a more robust argument come November 2024 if Trump is cast aside?
North Carolina.
So Patricia, let's talk a little bit about that in the context of Minnesota, since you dug deeply into that. You're both a resident and an analyst who's in the state. And you look at all things Midwestern, broadly defined. What did you see in the results in Minnesota last night that grabbed your attention?
Haley continued to do well with suburban voters. So her totals were highest in those areas, and she held Trump down quite a bit. I also think I keep hearing from many Republicans, kind of under the table, they feel like they have to, get on the Trump train because that's where the whole party is headed right now. But they don't really embrace his philosophy. A lot of them actually detest his rhetoric, his demonization of immigrants, other things that are just, kind of very un-Minnesotan. And I think, if he took a significant loss, they might finally be ready to be done with him. And then I don't know if you see a rebirth of Reaganism or if that 30% evolves into something entirely different to meet the new challenges.
Patricia, could that end up being a third party, or is the idea of a third party in the US just a pipe dream?
I don't think it will ever be a third party, and especially not coming out of Republicans. Democrats almost in.
Well, but that's such an interesting dynamic. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if anything, this progressive left would be more likely to split off. A lot of them represent the Bernie Sanders wing of the party, and Bernie ran very strong in Minnesota.
But there are a sort of a moderate, middle of the road voter, conservative Democrats, liberal Republicans, whatever you want to call them, independents as well, who all feel somewhat homeless. They don't cotton to Biden or Trump, and they can't really conscience going in either direction. So sometimes they stay home or they hold their nose in they vote. Is that just going to, in your mind, is that just going to remain that way inevitably, given the kind of hammerlock both parties have on the state apparatus, an electoral apparatus in every state?
It might, this party did elect a third party governor Jesse Ventura, who is from the Reform Party. So it is, they have a liking for the independent streak and, sort of the counter, culture candidate that goes against the grain. Minnesota has a definite taste for that. It's hard to say, though. I do think that, the low turnout is an indication that voters are dissatisfied with their current choices. Because for Minnesota especially, it's unusual to have that low a turnout, especially among Democrats. Trump actually got more votes statewide last night than Biden did, which is kind of astonishing.
What do you attribute that to?
Well, it's not organizing. I mean, the Republican Party here has been kind of a mess. They're broke. They don't have the capability. Trump has kind of ignored the state because he's focusing on an electoral college strategy. But I mean, he does seem to have some things in place, and people just seem to be motivated. I don't understand why, given the rallies that he's held and the positions that he's taken. I think they just like the idea of him. They're entertained by him, and they just don't seem to be thinking very deeply about that. They also have a very nostalgic view of what the economy was like pre-pandemic. And oddly enough, they don't associate any of the gains that are being made now, the record job creation, the infrastructure improvements, you just go down the list. Biden's not benefiting from that. They still have this sort of gauzy view of, groceries were cheaper and gas was cheaper and housing was cheaper. And they associate that with Trump.
And Trump obviously is well aware of that. He in his victory speech last night, I think one of the first things he said, which is not grounded at all in reality, no. I'll add, was that the stock market is soaring because his poll numbers are soaring. And while he went there, that's completely factually untrue. Stock markets ultimately soar because corporate earnings are robust, which they have been, et cetera, et cetera. He also didn't focus on the fact that the economy itself is very robust. Mm-hmm. There's been great wage growth. There's been great job growth. Inflation has moderated, but voters, Nia, are still feeling this hangover of the inflation spike and a sense of, I think, uncertainty in their own households and in their own personal lives about the economy. Trump intends to exploit that. So coming off of this big Super Tuesday victory for Trump, what do you see him capitalizing on in the days ahead that get to his best political advantage? Where do you think he'll go from here?
I think it's going to be the economy because, voters I've talked to certainly do have a view of the Trump economy. And there's been a sense for decades that Republicans are better with the economy. Trump is obviously a billionaire, or maybe he isn't. He probably isn't anymore, given all the judgments against him.
I won't get into that with you right now.
Yeah. right. So there is this reputation that he has that voters still remember. So it'll be the economy. It'll also be immigration, right? That is something that has typically favored Republicans. You'll see Democrats try to lean in and go on offense on that. But, this idea of building a wall and having Mexico pay for it in 2016 works so well. We've seen in polling that Republicans do a little bit better, even though with the kind of tanking of this bill in Congress that would secure the border a bit more that Republicans blocked. You see some of the poll numbers shifting a little bit and Republicans having a little bit of the blame as well. So those are sort of the issues. I mean, he is running as the gloom and doom candidate, right? There is a dystopic future if Biden and I alone can fix it, right? I mean, Trump is really sort of running as this sort of messianic figure, right? It is in some ways no surprise that he is doing well among sort of white evangelicals who do see him as a kind of a Christ-like figure almost. I mean, all the polling suggests that they believe Trump more than they believe their own pastors, right? And so that's who he is, I think, in the minds of particularly his voters. going to work on these sort of independent, suburban voters that we saw preferred Nikki Haley in some of these primaries. It's not clear, but that kind of rhetoric of I am here to defend you, I am you, I represent your grievances, that sort of emotional pull that he has on his voters is incredibly powerful. And Joe Biden just can't match it. He just doesn't have that sort of personality and pull for Democratic voters.
Trump is really
Patricia, build on that a little bit. I think that when, a lot of us, especially we pointy-headed journalists, focus on policy and governance and all the meat and potatoes of holding office, but voters often look for just a deep emotional connection. They want to see themselves in the candidates that they support. And the most deft and successful political candidates are those who can wed that emotional connection to real policy making and managerial chops when they govern. Both Barack Obama and Ronald Reagan come to mind in that. Wherever you reside ideologically, they did combine those things. What do you think, Patricia, in this election, ultimately it's going to be emotion and passion that wins?
Yes, I think to a certain extent it always is. We've seen that over and over again. Voters need to feel a connection to their candidate. And, Trump, I see him really leaning into his cult leader status and relishing it and enjoying the power that he exerts over, over his supporters. And meanwhile, he excels at one thing. He drives home a message like few candidates I've ever seen. And in doing so, he invents his own reality. It's sort of the big lie. He told countless lies last night during his speech, but he hammers them home over and over and over again. We all know that Biden won the 2020 election, and yet, he was so relentless about his messaging on that we now see that, a vast percentage of Republican voters actually believe that, Trump got the election stolen out from under him, even though that's never been verified.
Which is disturbing. No, I was going to say.
Why would you be disturbed by lies and propaganda, Nia? Yeah.
No, I think at some point Americans will have to come to grips with the fact that there are millions of Americans who are conspiracy theorists, right? And have fallen sway to somebody, I think, who we have rightfully likened to a cult leader who has authoritarian impulses, right? So if you're Joe Biden, the argument is sort of, can he save America from itself, right? These darker impulses that have to do demographic shifts and white fear and white grievance, that is the glue that really binds this Republican Party. And Trump is a master at playing on those fears. And we'll see. I mean, it's obviously going to be a close election. The polls show that Donald Trump is ahead in any number of swing states, and we'll just have to wait and see. But it is a disturbing, I think, portrait of America and Americans that they are willing to seemingly entrust someone who has, 91 indictments, who is a liar and a crook, essentially, with America's future, right? The beacon of the world, entrust that to Donald Trump. It's to me, I find it disturbing. We are sort of critical enough in terms of how we're looking at what this means for average Americans. They tend to seem to like the idea of a strong man in both ways that can be, meant, strong man and strong man. And so it's, we'll see what happens. I mean, all we can do is hope that, there is a majority to reject this kind of extremism.
Yeah.
He may be a crook, but he's my crook. That's sort of like
right.
that's clear in the GOP voters' minds now. And it doesn't seem like Democratic voters are saying he may be a doddering old man about Biden, but he's my doddering old man. Democrats haven't crossed that bridge. We're almost out of time. Patricia, give me your last thought about this dynamic.
Well, it's been said that facts don't care about feelings, but the reality is feelings don't care about your facts. And I think that's a lot of the dynamic we're seeing among Republican voters. They have such a powerful connection to him at this point that facts are kind of immaterial to them.
Well, let's keep facts material to us. I hope you two can join me again as we continue to watch this cage match continue. And Nia-Malika Henderson and Patricia Lopez, thanks for joining me this morning.